Thank you very much. So a lot of what you would have heard this morning is kind of hard to visualise. So what I want to do is share with you an experience that's very real to me and one that I never forget. And so first of all, I'll start with a bit of a lesson on the Australian electricity market. So you've got to think about Australia. It's about the size of the US, just slightly smaller than the US in terms of size, but with 1/15 of the population. And so the implication of that is we tend to like to live on the coast. Despite the sharks in the water, we like to hang out at the beach. And you don't have to drive very far inland in Australia and you stop passing houses, right? So what this means is you end up with this very long, stringy grid. So we have about, I think, over 45,000 kilometres of transmission line, and it runs through about 5 or 6 states or territories. And it services about 20 million residential, commercial and industrial customers. And the fuel mix it's varied, but like a lot of places has been predominantly coal-based. Now, one of the other things that you'll know about Australia is it's quite sunny. So we have a huge market penetration of solar PV. So I think in some states it would be near on 40%. It'd certainly be somewhere between 30 and 40% in different parts of the grid. The other thing that's happening in Australia is that we have a large-scale renewable energy target. And you can see there on that chart on the right-hand side, South Australia has got one of the highest penetrations of renewables in the world. And when you put that on the end of a long, stringy grid, that can create some issues. And those red dots and green dots are the system strength or the reliability and system security of that grid throughout the East Coast. And you can see South Australia, which is sort of bottom left-hand corner, lots of red. So let's talk about ice skating. So in Australia, we love sport. We love a sporting expression, and there's a sporting expression that I quite like, which is called doing a Bradbury. And so let me tell you what that is. So in Australia, we're not really renowned for having lots of snow and ice like you are blessed with here in Europe. And so speed skating is not a very popular sport. And we would send our teams to the Winter Olympics every 4 years, and the trophy cabinet would come back pretty empty. But Stephen Bradbury made the final in 2002 of the Salt Lake City Winter Olympics. Now, he was such a rank outsider, he wasn't even expected to be in the final. In the heats, or in the quarterfinals, only 2 of the top 3 went through, and he finished 3rd. So mentally, he was probably packing his bags at that point, and he gets the call up to say that one of the top 2 has been disqualified for impeding the other skater. So now he's through into the semi-final, or semi-final for you US folk in the audience. And again, he's up against a quality field. This is a field which has the hometown local hero who's a multi-Olympic medalist, and it has also a world champions. He is a distant 4th, right? There's daylight between him and these other 3 skaters going around. They crash, he goes through. He's suddenly in the final. So let me show you the last little bit of the final. So after a little bit of time, the judges reviewed the race. They determined it didn't need to be rerun, and he became the first person from the Southern Hemisphere to win an Olympic gold medal event. So at this point, you're going, what the hell does that have to do with renewables? But bear with me, and I'll try and tie it all together. But to do that first, I have to tell you a bit about myself. So prior to being in the energy industry, I've been in the energy industry probably coming up to 20 years. I was an investment banker. And so most of my time in the energy industry has been spent trading, buying and selling businesses and also doing strategy. So I'm more renowned for being on PowerPoint than running a business. Actually, I don't think Frank's ever let me loose to run a business. And I was sitting on the trading desk, this was back in September 2016, and there was a big storm developing over the south of Australia, through southern Australia, and whilst we might not do many Winter Olympic gold medals, we are gold medals when it comes to storms, and we can really put one on. This storm was a 1 in 50-year event. It had 80,000 lightning strikes. It had huge winds, and so I was sitting in the trading desk. There's all these screens, more screens than you know what to do with, and South Australia started to become, had some stability issues. And within a short period of time, about 3 events happened, and the market became too unstable. So the market operator does what every team player does when you're in that position. They walk up, they smile, and they cut you loose. And so South Australia went into blackout. So what we're talking about is a geographical region 3 times the size of Germany, suddenly system black, at 6 o'clock at night, with a big storm approaching, or actually it hit at this point, and no one's got any power. So at that point, my phone rings, and it's the emergency response getting stood up. Now, Origin has large operations. It has a big retail presence in South Australia. It has a huge generation presence in the market. It has the black start capability in those power generation units to get the market up and running. And we also have an LPG business as well, which is distributed throughout the state. And so I'm thinking, wow, they're ringing up for the strategies guys' view on what happened. And so I'm getting ready to give them that. And I said, who's leading the response? And I said, is Frank Calabria, our CEO, leading the response? And the answer to that was he was in Europe or the US on some investor relations or investor roadshow. So I went, okay, that's fine. What about Greg Jarvis, our GM of EGM of generation? So he would run most of these plants. He was on holidays. So then I said, well, what about John Briskin? He runs our retail business, so he will at least know that side of it. And they said he was in London. And I said, who's next on the list? And they said, you are. So I was going to have a Bradbury moment where I'd never run a business, and I was going to stand it up from a blackout event. So basically the system went black because renewable generation couldn't generate in that much wind. A few transmission lines had been hit by lightning, and had caused some frequency issues at some of the thermal plant, and they tripped, and so the whole market had gone black at this point. So myself and many others over the next 24 hours spent a lot of time trying to get the market re-establish supply to our customers. And a lot of that time was spent on the phone, gathering data points, gathering information of what had happened, and trying to piece together how we stood the market back up. And we did that in the early hours of the morning, and we re-established supply to our customers. And then really, as a lot of you would know, after a big event like this, the post-mortem of what happened starts to occur. And at least initially, those aren't surrounded with the facts. And so the initial, if you like, dialogue was that renewables were to blame, and that position was a function of whether you supported them or not. So it became a bit of a political issue. As we got more data through from the market operator over the course of the weeks following, the question still remained. A lot of thermal generation had retired in South Australia as all of this wind had come in. And so the question was, if those units were thermal, would this have happened? And I think the answer to that question is we don't really know. It may be. We couldn't say definitely, but it's actually the wrong question. And the reason I say that is that we've built electricity systems all around the world to do the same thing, to balance demand and supply with one lever, which is supply. So we have big control rooms, we have large assets, and we have a largely foreseeable demand. It's different every day, but we're pretty good at forecasting what that will be. And really the job, despite all the fancy acronyms, is have enough big assets around that if it gets too hot or too cold, or one of those falls over, that you're able to still supply customers. Now that's rushing, as you've heard today, headlong into an undeniable move to renewable energy, and an undeniable move to a lot of that being distributed and lots of devices in the market. And that creates a problem for us, because the very lever that we use to manage demand and supply has now become quite variable. And the key thing with that is that we also have demand where the solar PV is coming in that moves around as well. So in Australia, our answer, rightly or wrongly, has been to move towards a 5-minute market. So that's a 5-minute price and settlement market. And that means that the risk and volatility of that market will increase. And so then what we're talking about is we're talking about trying to integrate highly variable renewables, millions and millions of devices, as opposed to the energy system today, into what is essentially an essential service. So this is where customers want security of supply, and they want to make sure that we can supply that. So if you think of those millions of devices, the Internet of Things is like the Wild West for large energy companies. We have large control rooms, we have large assets, we have SCADA systems that are all surrounded by big walls. And there'll be many a company that'll attest that once you put something on the internet, you're never really in control of it. And so you find yourself really at that point being quite overwhelmed by what that change will mean. And you end up with a couple of choices. You end up with build bigger walls, try and keep the hoarders at bay, and become increasingly insular. Or you look at how you can embrace that technology and use that data to help solve the problem. Oh, hang on, I'll just go back. So in South Australia on that day, it may have been renewables to blame, it may not, but we know we're rushing headlong into a different sort of world, and we have to think about how we solve that differently. It wasn't the fact that renewables were there, it's the fact that we didn't have the data. So what's the solution? The solution is to have as much amount of data as we can in real time at our fingertips to make the most amount of decisions we can and flexibility to do that. After this event happened, it actually led to changes in the way that we operate the market. And that's testament to the fact that if we had that data at the time, we may have been able to do things differently. The great thing about this is that the cost of communications, the cost of data storage, and the cost of compute is all falling, so this will play nicely to what we have to do to solve this problem. And the key to integrating renewables into a highly volatile market and integrating all the distributed assets into a highly volatile market really is three things. It is communications, it is control, and it is coordination. And that's what we have to achieve. The solution is really to run the system like a Formula One car and not an old train. But we do have some challenges. So our industry is different. It's not like a Nest thermostat that perhaps locks out its customer and the customer goes without heating or cooling that day. It's not like a Tesla car that won't start after an over-the-air update. We're in an industry which powers people's lives, it's an industry which powers people's businesses, and it powers economies. And we have to get this right. they have trusted us, or they are entrusting us, with moving them to a lower carbon future and to integrate this without the lights going out and without the costs going through the roof. And so the key thing that we need, which has been touched on a little bit earlier today, is to have the right energy and data standards. It's to have the interoperability to coordinate the system, and it's to ultimately have the security to bring it all together in a secure way for the customer. And finally, it has to be seamless for the customer. We heard today about a customer experience. The customer wants to have secure supply, they want a lower carbon future, they don't want to be thinking about energy. And so, I don't know about you, but I think most of our customers would much prefer to be watching sport than thinking about energy supply. That's it for me.